Today, we'll be evaluating. Focusing on evaluating community engagement, we're asking why, how, and what we evaluate. A challenge for most practitioners is measuring the success or value of community engagement. This may be your first learning lab, or you may be a seasoned learning lab technician. In these sessions, we're aiming to develop community engagement skills and knowledge amongst our colleagues, clients, and peers. In this session, we'll be asking you to reflect on your current evaluation practices before delving deeper into the background, types, and tools for evaluation that are floating around the community engagement sphere. As we go, please send through any questions or comments you have into the chat, or you can use the QA function. I'll be reading the questions and comments in the chat, and I'll post them to Claire and Amy following the presentation. We'll be using a poll tool to get to know some questions, to get to know some things about you, ask some questions, get to know who's in the room, which will pop up on the screen. And I also wanted to, before going forward, introduce, we might not need much introduction, Amy Hubbard here, co-founder and director of Capire, and Clare Murrell, associate and sector lead, and fabulous team lead, if I'm a little bit biased to say so. So, without further ado, shall we open up the poll to see who's with us today, and ask the first question off the bat: how often do you evaluate your engagement? So we've got some votes coming in now. I'm trying to look at the trends here, like it's a horse race, but it's really going back and forth, seeing a lot of sometimes and a lot of often. So I'm getting the feeling here that it's a sometimes thing, it's an occasional thing. We might delve into evaluation when we've got a bit of spare time.
The second question there too, Christian, that people are also answering is what stops you from evaluating your engagement? So what might be some of those kind of barriers? It looks like time to evaluate is the one that's winning the race there. So it's a really interesting thing for us to be able to consider and unpack as well.
So we've got 75 responses there. Time really taking the lead with the other factors, roughly evening. Okay, great. Well, thanks to the 79 participants who answered. Overwhelmingly, we see that evaluating engagement is just a sometimes thing. For some of you, it's often an often thing. For 8%, it's an always thing. And once again, overwhelmingly, we see that time is the biggest constraint there. So with a little bit of don't know how, a little bit of lack of interest. So I think we'll be touching on all of these matters as we go through today's session, which is a really exciting session coming up. And on that note, I think I'll pass over to Amy, co-founder and director at Capire, to lead today's discussion on evaluation.
Thank you, Christian. And Christian is one of our exemplar consultants at Capire, and he took on the challenge of working with Clare, Murrell and myself. So good luck to Christian with that. You'll be corralling us to time, I'm sure. So welcome everyone. And you know, we've got 94 of you in the room with us today, and that's kind of remarkable given everything going on in the world. And well, I suppose the temperature outside would lend itself to participating in a webinar, because you wouldn't probably want to leave your house today. So we've got a few things that we're going to take you through today. Capire are not evaluation experts, but we do evaluation on our engagement processes. And we find that in the life cycle of engagement, this area, this kind of step, sometimes it's the final step before we kick off the next process. It's the one that's left behind. You know, people, because of that factor of time, people leave because they're busy, they're important, they've got to get on to the next thing. And we understand that, and we live and breathe that every day. So I'm going to share my screen because that's what we do. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what evaluation is. So first of all, evaluation in its purest sense is about understanding the worth of something. So, you know, you're evaluating the worth. But when we're looking at evaluation and community engagement, we're looking at the why, what, and how of what you're doing, and understanding what's being achieved. And really what's not is also very equally as important. It's also about capturing your lessons learned and how you'll use those learnings in the future. I'll always say to the practitioners at Capire and any of my colleagues in other sectors or other consultancies, as practitioners, we've got a responsibility to continue to grow and learn. It's a dynamic field. And I would hope that people who are practicing in this space continue to grow with every project that they undertake and every engagement that they deliver. So then why is evaluating engagement important? You know, we could just leave those projects and kind of get on to the next thing because we are busy, you know, time is always an issue. But importantly, in evaluating engagement enables you to understand and communicate the value of the process. And we're working with decision makers. You know, often we're working with engineers or architects. I won't say urban planners because they have a different understanding and view of engagement, but we're working with people, other professionals, and also people in the community that don't understand the value until they can see that the outcomes have benefited. You know, sometimes money is saved, sometimes time is saved as well. But it's about communicating the value of engagement. But also you can design and deliver more effective engagement by understanding what's working, what's not working with different communities or cohorts or different types of projects. But importantly, as I mentioned, it's about learning and growing your practice and the practice of people around you. So just more on that practice piece. So evaluation is core to any community engagement practice. It's a key element, often forgotten, but we're not going to forget you today, evaluation. And what evaluation enables us to do is really get an understanding on, you know, did we achieve the objectives and the outcomes? What worked, what didn't, and why? How will we improve, or how will you improve your engagement practice in the future? What impact did the engagement have on the community or the communities? Who needs to know about the project? Who participated, and what were the outcomes? And how will you share what you've learned with others? So evaluation does enable you to do all of these things. But to do this, your engagement processes, materials, resources, anything that you're doing and using in that tools and techniques, that delivery phase, needs to be designed to capture the evaluation data, to monitor and assess and report on the engagement. Really, really important. So there's quite a few different types of engagement, and often we see evaluation frameworks. We put together evaluation frameworks with our clients that take on different elements of different types of evaluation. And evaluation as a discipline on its own, there are quite a few different types of evaluations. So you may not think of these as different types of evaluation, they're just kind of evaluation, but I'm going to go through them anyway. So we've got formative, and formative in the evaluation profession, you might do a formative evaluation in, say, a feasibility stage. But what I observe in our practice is we will start to implement, and we'll start looking around what's working, what's not working, where do we need to tweak, what do we need to change, when are we bringing in the translators or the different types of materials. And that's it's monitoring, but it's formative evaluation. So you're evaluating as you're going, and you're looking around and going, you know, what's going on here? We want to make sure that this evaluation process and the engagement process is a success, and we can capture this data. It's a formative evaluation. The process evaluation is the quality of the implementation of the engagement. And this is what we see a lot of in our engagement practice. So how many people attended what type of event, how many downloads on the website, the engagement hub, what type of information are people requesting, etc. So it's looking at the process of evaluation. Then we've got outcomes-based evaluation. So it's the resulting effects from the community engagement. So what happened as a result of the engagement? What changes were made, or what decisions were informed? Where is the golden thread between the engagement, the evidence, and the decision and the outcome? Where is the link there? So that's the outcome, because you could have a gold star engagement process, which is a process evaluation, but then sort of that outcomes, it may not happen. There might be a change of government or a change of leadership, and the outcome may not actually ever be realized. Impact evaluation, it's kind of similar to the outcomes, but it's done at a time where you can look at the enduring impacts of the engagement, sometime after it's ended. And when we do impact-based evaluation on our engagement, we look at the social structures in the community, and we have a look at, well, what wouldn't have been if it wasn't for the engagement that we undertook. So it is about those linkages and the relationships and the knowledge, the capacity, empowerment that is left behind after the engagement has ended. And I've got a fifth type of like a loose category. I don't know that you'll see it in the literature, but what we're seeing in the engagement practice is a values-based engagement. And values-based engagement, put quite simply, it could be like the IAP2 core values. So evaluating against a set of values. So they'd be the core values. Though recently we did an evaluation with the core values, but because the core values doesn't look at inclusion, accessibility, and diversity, we added in another value to include in there. So that was a values type evaluation. So look, we're seeing a blend of these types of evaluations, and that kind of reflects the type of work that we do. We're design, we're delivering, we're looking for outcomes, we're looking for social impacts, and we're value-led as a discipline. So just some key terms, because I see that and observe our clients and the consultants at Capire. I am probably guilty of doing this too. We interchange some of the language that we use around evaluations. So some of the key terms that we talk about are criteria. So it's used as a basis for the judgment, okay? And in engagement, they're usually directly linked to objectives and outcomes. So when you're putting together your objectives and outcomes, this should start to form the foundation of your evaluation framework. Then we have indicators. Okay, so indicators are measurable information used to determine if the engagement is achieving its objectives. Okay, so it's measurable information. And then we have the measure itself. So it's a tool or resource used for measuring. And often these measures are standardized across organizations, so they can benchmark and continually kind of compare processes, what's working well, what's not working well, and share that information so the organisation can see how they're tracking. So just to put it quite simply, I wanted just to put the steps up to evaluate, because some people are really well versed in this area of engagement, and some of you I know today are newbies, and we're all here to share. So let's just talk about those steps. So first of all, the first step in any engagement is to prepare your plan. And the first step in preparing your plan is not to jump to the tools. It is to articulate your purpose, your objectives, and your outcomes. I say jumping to tools is kind of in jest, but we see that all the time. We just got to do the shiny thing, forget about the objectives. No, we start with the objectives and we create the plan. And within that plan, we've got criteria and indicators and measures which support those objectives and outcomes. The second step is implementing that plan. So implementing that plan, and it might be that you start implementing it 2 weeks before you actually go public, because you're getting your house in order, then you go public. But while you're getting your house in order and while you've got a public process, or even if it's not a public process, just, you know, the start date to the finish date, you're starting to collect the data. You know, you're starting to you know, you're looking at your evaluation framework. What do I need to be collecting? When am I collecting it? How am I using it? And how is it informing my evaluation? But you're also monitoring for any trends to identify where you might need to make tweaks or radical changes to your engagement. And I'm sure all of you have made some pretty radical changes to your engagement processes that have been planned over the last couple of years. The step 3 is after that final day of your engagement period, or that pause. It might be a pause. You start to analyze that data, and you know, you're looking at how you're tracking your performance, but you're also doing the lessons learned piece to identify any recommendations for future engagement. And finally, the 4th step is reporting and sharing. And I think this is really important because organisations that we work with, they do evaluation on all of their projects, but they're not sharing. So how is the practice growing? How are people learning from the success or the failures of other engagement processes? So how you report and you share the engagement is really, really important. So our learnings, Capire is 15 years young, I suppose. 15 years young, we like to think of ourselves as young. Christian is quite young. I feel quite old today. So we're 15 years old. We have done 1,500 projects in that time. So we've undertaken quite a few evaluations, both on our client work, but we also, you know, we evaluate our impact every 6 months as well, because we are a B Corp. So our learnings, we're not evaluation experts, but we can evaluate. And that's probably every person who is on this webinar. If you work in engagement, you can evaluate. The tools of social science, the tools of good planning and management enable you to evaluate your engagement. Evaluation must be considered at the start of the project and embedded in the project life cycle. It must be. That's kind of a non-negotiable. You have to be thinking about it at the start. You have to be thinking about what you need to evaluate, because you can't be doing that at the end. There's few integrity issues there if you decide on your evaluation criteria at the end. Evaluation has engagement objectives at its core. It's where you start in planning your evaluation process. And the scale of the evaluation should be proportional to the scope and budget of the community engagement. So if your community engagement is 1 day, 1 forum, you're not going to do an evaluation process that takes 1 day. You know, you're going to do an evaluation that's proportional to the time, resources, commitment, energy that has gone into the engagement. Look, we would always use mixed methods for our evaluation, and that might only mean 2 tools. But what we're looking for is some quantitative information and some qualitative information. As we know, qualitative information will bring those numbers to life and understand the stories, the challenges behind some of those numbers. So mixed methods, really important. And data collection tools need to be matched to the type of community engagement being conducted. So, you know, whether, you know, they're in person or online, there's got to be some correlation there as well. Importantly, you need an evaluation culture to succeed. Now, I always talk about in engagement, you need to be looking back to understand the context, what's gone on before you. You need to be looking back on the last project with the evaluation before you start looking forward. Often because of this issue of time, we're just looking forward. We're looking just to the next thing that we need to do, but you always need to be looking back as well, especially to grow as an engagement practitioner, but also to continue to evolve your engagement practice in your organisation, because your communities are evolving as well. They're changing and their engagement needs are changing also. So importantly, consider carefully how you communicate your findings and how you share and how you share your learnings as well. Really important, you have to share. You can't sort of leave your evaluation data in a silo somewhere. People need to benefit from it. And it's also about how you share, actually provide a report as such. Should it be a 20-page report? Probably not. Should it be a 1-page infographic? That sounds great. Keep it succinct, keep it visual, and share what's important. So just some key considerations for you before you launch into your next evaluation framework design. When you're preparing your engagement plan, think about with your project team what successful engagement looks like for your project or process, what it looks like and why. Really, really important. You've got to think about how your evaluation process is linked and supports your objectives, because sometimes we see objectives in chapter 1, and in chapter 6 we see evaluation criteria and there's no link there. That doesn't really work. That doesn't work. What are your indicators and measures? Be clear on what they mean as well. When is the appropriate time to conduct the evaluation? Is it 3 months after the engagement has been finalised? Is it the week after it's been finalised? Is it throughout? That's up to you. Which evaluation tools to use? Who the audience is for the evaluation. Are you going to go public with the evaluation and let your community members know and understand where kind of their investment, the success of their investment, or where it could be improved in the future? Or is it for decision makers? Is it for others? Who is responsible for undertaking the evaluation? And I've had to pull a few people up in the industry when they were undertaking their own evaluation of their own work, and that was the evaluation. It might be this issue with bias doing that, which I'm sure you're very aware of. So you probably want to bring a few different people in to undertake that evaluation that have different perspectives on the process. Some of the best evaluation processes I've seen are where we've got a group from the community, and we've got a group from decision makers, and we've got a group of stakeholders, and they come together to undertake that evaluation together, looking at the data, unpacking the stories, and creating that 1-page summary. So finally, what matters most? We can't measure everything. We can't capture every story. And I also observed the evaluation burden of engagement practitioners, where everyone is so focused on being able to communicate the value of engagement. It's a massive distraction from actually doing good engagement, doing proper and thorough engagement. So think about what matters most. I'm just going to do a time check. Okay. So just one more slide before I hand over to my colleague Claire. I just wanted to put up a really simple evaluation framework for the newbies out there, because you might be thinking, what does this look like in my engagement plan? And this evaluation framework I put together based on the Capire engagement triangle, and it has 3 objectives, the triangle, and it's a tool to start your thinking around what your objectives could be for your engagement. So the objectives they're quite macro: informing decisions, strengthening relationships, and sharing knowledge. And you'll see on the screen that we've got some criteria. So what is it that we're evaluating to make our judgment? Okay, so what is it? The indicator there, so what we're going to look to measure, the measure itself, so it's that information, that measure, that data, and how we go about the evaluation with the actual technique. And you'll see that the technique there, we've got the percent increase in overall positive response. And that's when, over time, you want to be measuring things and seeing that there's an increase. but someone needs to start. And I think it's really important to benchmark and compare and contrast how you go. That's just a really simple evaluation framework, because I wanted to let, as I said, the newbies see something. I'm going to hand over to Claire, so I will stop sharing and I will mute myself, and you'll hear a little bit more from me soon.
Thanks, Amy. Button has been passed over. Baton has been passed. Thank you. I'll share my screen as we do. I'll take that away. So thanks so much, Amy. Always a really amazing information that's shared, lots of food for thought. So Amy talked about the types of evaluation, and I'm going to shine a spotlight on a few examples of evaluation tools or techniques that we're fans of here at Capire. So when Amy was talking about formative evaluation, so being the type that identifies where you can adjust or improve your approach, improve it as you go in the early stages, I'm a real fan of online metrics as a tool. So I'll have a bit of a deep dive into that one. In terms of process evaluation, where the project or stage of engagement is complete and you want to understand the quality of delivery in order to make improvements the next time or the next stage, here I'll share the lessons learned process that we undertake at Capire. In terms of the outcomes evaluation, where you're seeking to understand the outcomes as a result of your engagement, here I'll share the example of the most significant change technique. And in terms of impact, where we want to gain an understanding of the longer term impacts of the engagement, I'm going to share the social network analysis tool. So, online metrics. So the advantage of using online metrics for monitoring our engagement is that it can happen from the day of launch and the information can be readily accessed. The example I'm using here is based on some of the common online engagement platforms in Australia, which I know a lot of our government agency clients will be familiar with, without naming names. While some data that you get through your online engagement platform is automated, other data will depend on how you've set it up. That's an important point that Amy touched on as well. So automated data in an online engagement platform, that's going to include things like the number of visitors, so unique visitors or returning visitors, those who've then contributed to a tool, and then those who follow a project. So I've got a little diagram example there of some of the information you might get in your dashboard. So you can consider each of these participants as informed if they've come and visited the site, that they're active if they've contributed, and that they might be a bit more highly engaged if they're then following your project. So that's informative for you. Right from the start of your project, you can start to see those numbers. An example of where you need to set up the data in order to meet your evaluation needs includes those demographic targets that you will have identified at the start of your project. So you may want to understand things like the location of where your participants are from, the age, the gender, the household type, etc. This can either be via, say, a site registration, asking participants to start an account, or via the tools that you choose, so such as a survey. So you just need to ensure that you're setting up your tools in that way to be able to gather and track that information. So in terms of the process type of evaluation, an example that's really common and easy, what we consider easy to deliver at Capire, we use it often with our clients, is the lessons learnt workshop. So typically you'd involve a broad range of the project team, even those individuals who may have only been involved in maybe one aspect of delivery or perhaps had a connection with one type of cohort of stakeholders. But if we can also include an independent facilitator, say a colleague or someone outside of the project to assist with the discussions, that really helps people to fully participate as well. It's helpful if the project manager presents a bit of an overview of the process. Sometimes people might need a reminder of all the things that happened, so sort of that objective information. And then you really create space for everyone to reflect and share their learnings. So you frame the questions in a way that enables reflection. And it might be things based on, what worked well, what would you do differently, what surprised you, and what have we learned, what's new as a result. And touching again on some of the information that Amy shared earlier, the discussion should be documented and shared. So some of the ways we do that at Capire is we might include the information in our engagement outcomes report that goes back to the client, and that may go back to participants. And we also turn into a case study that we can then use and share as well. So in terms of the outcomes type of evaluation, the most significant change approach is one that could be considered. So most significant change is qualitative, in nature. It's a storytelling technique, and it's useful for oral data collection too, where perhaps you may have low literacy in the stakeholders that you've been engaging with as well. It's considered and structured, so it gathers stories from a broad range of experiences to understand the outcomes of the engagement process. Key features include that it, again, involves a storytelling technique, and also involves a panel review who will determine which stories demonstrate the most significant example of change. This could involve subject matter experts, staff, and other key stakeholders, and perhaps a cohort of the community as well. The benefit of this approach is that you learn about the similarities and differences of experiences, so from one extreme to the other, in order to then demonstrate the most significant change. It does require agreement on the sorts of change that you want to identify. So for example, are you looking to understand behavioural change, the uptake within a program, community resistance or support that may have changed to a proposal, and the trust and confidence in decision makers that may be built as a result of the engagement process. It does take time and it requires facilitation skills to undertake it. And it can be an opportunity actually to continue your engagement with your stakeholders and community as well. An example, I've used this, and a version of this technique to understand the effectiveness of a program in Timor-Leste. And my final spotlight on tools is the social network analysis. It's a tool I came across when I was working on a project at DELP, where there was a really strong desire to understand who the key stakeholders were, who had relationships with them, and how could they be improved. So in thinking about long-term impact of our community engagement work, I think this could be a really useful tool to consider in being able to map and assess the strength of relationships and therefore the impact of an engagement process on those relationships. So social network analysis requires really good data management. So you'll draw on a stakeholder database, which can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. It does require predetermined categories that you tag to an individual or group, such as stakeholder type, their interest in the project, or the health of the relationship. And there are a range of free or paid programs that you can then use to map and visualise your information, such as Tableau or Kumu. There's lots of information on the internet if you want to find out more, or give me a call if you want to find out more as well. I encourage you to check it out. It's a really, excuse me, very interesting tool. So my top 4, I guess, takeaways in terms of the tools and techniques you use for data collection, they can be very simple and reflective in nature, or they can be more complex and structured. As Amy said, you can identify, you will identify your key evaluation questions and tools during the early engagement scoping stages of your engagement planning. A multi-method of data collection is advised. Just one tool or technique won't be enough to understand the full impact of your work. And evaluation activities can be a continuation or extension of engagement through opportunity. I think I will leave it there, Amy, and hopefully we've got some questions we can ponder on and share. Thank you.
We sure do. There's some great questions coming into the Q&A, so thanks everyone for sharing them, and keep them coming as we go ahead as well. We had a question from Andrew, who said that I found that online engagement outcomes were statistically different to the results obtained from physically randomly selected household surveys. What type of trends do we see with who engages online, and how do we manage those risks so we don't have a skewed result?
Who wants to take that on board, Amy? I guess it's more an engagement question than it is an evaluation question. What do you think?
It's an engagement question, not an evaluation question, but hey, we've got some experience in engagement. So how do you, manage the skewed response result? So if this is about generally your engagement toolkit, obviously well, maybe it's not obvious, but you'd use a range of engagement tools which align to the engagement or participation preferences of your community. So if you were to do a household survey and an online survey, I would hope you know who the people are completing them. At Capire, we have standard demographic questions that we ask on all of our surveys that we work with our clients. Happy to share them. Email me, I can send it to you. So you actually know which stakeholders and which community members you are, receiving responses from. Where there are gaps, because you are doing your monitoring and evaluation, that's where you may need to go and use different techniques to entice or enable those humans to step up to the engagement table and to provide, their input into the process. Claire, have you got anything to add?
No, I agree with that. I was already looking at the next question, thinking about the answer to that. But yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying there, Amy. Great.
We also had a question from Lisa about what kind of things can be captured with evaluation. The question is, I've seen lots of effective evaluations of individual engagement programs or processes, but what I'm interested in is whether anyone has measured cumulative engagement activities within an organization or community, and whether they lead to more or less trust, increased involvement, and likelihood to engage in the future. For example.
Claire, I'll let you respond to this one. I think you've got some very recent experience in this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, there can be drivers to this, Lisa, but I think, a good engagement program manager will be looking at individual projects, but also be looking at this kind of organizational program view in order to say, how we're going with our engagement practice as an organization. That can be a real driver to that as well, and to be able to understand. So, another driver might be you're coming up with a community engagement policy or community engagement framework in your organization, and you want to understand, your current state of play in order to then inform how you can kind of improve practice, improve engagement with your community. So you might, take that question out to stakeholders, to community members, and to, within internally into your organisation as well. It might be a slightly different, set of questions and measurables in terms of what you're wanting to evaluate, but the processes would be the same. You're understanding your purpose, you're understanding your audiences, you're understanding your data collection, that kind of thing. So, I think, what best good practice in our engagement and learnings in our engagement is around the projects we're delivering, but it is also the bigger picture around our programs and how we are practicing our engagement as well. I hope that helps. That's something that we did at City of Yarra. Every year we would be reporting on that, but we'd also be informing our practice, and at DELP, really big investment there in terms of understanding the program as a whole, and other drivers too, like Department of Premier and Cabinet reporting framework that's coming out. I'm sure some government agencies are looking at that as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Claire. Another question's come in from Amanda. Can we talk about where we've involved community members to inform the evaluation process? So for context, there's a community advisory group who provide advice for all the engagement activities. We're about to update our framework with their input. So that's about involving community in the evaluation framework and process.
I can talk to that. We have a core value in our profession where we do engage the community before we go out to engage, whether that's to test the tools and techniques, whether, the information or the knowledge that we're going to just be, sharing in the community is going to work. That's really important, that pre-engagement piece. And I would be, if you can, bringing community members to the table to discuss, explore, refine the evaluation criteria, especially when you start to ask the question, what does success look like? Because success to the project team, to the engagement practitioner, to the decision maker, well, they're all going to be different. And from the community side, it will look different as well. So if you can bring the community to the table where you're putting that evaluation framework together, you will have a much more holistic process, and I would really recommend that.
Question to the panel. What's your one piece of advice to clients? One piece of advice regarding evaluation?
I'll go, Claire. So my advice is, what do you want to know? Because, a lot of our clients are like, oh my God, there's too much. Well, oh, what are we going to evaluate? There's too many things, there's too many numbers, too many stories, it's going to take too much time. And it's like, what is, what are the handful of things that we can capture through this process that will not only be able to demonstrate the value of the process, but also enable your team or your broader division to reflect and grow their practice and understand, what worked and what didn't work. So I start with, what do we need to know? And often clients will say, well, I don't need to know, but it's like, well, no, let's unpack that more. Because if they value engagement, there's something in there that we can unpack with them. But don't think big, don't get overwhelmed. Focus in on a couple of things that you can do, especially if you're new to evaluation. Clare?
Yeah, I like that. I think, I would really encourage people to consider accountability. I think when we're accountable to our evaluation, that can include things like, reporting structures and who within the authorising environment, needs to know this information, and what bit of the information do they need to know, and let's make the organisation accountable and the project delivery accountable to doing the evaluation, reporting on the evaluation, and using that information to then improve things into the future.
Great. Thank you. And maybe as a final question, if you have any more that come to your mind, feel free to chuck us an email our way. We'll get back to you. But if you could evaluate one aspect of engagement, what would it be?
For me, it's about the diversity of the participants, because so often engagement processes are dominated by a vocal few, and they're vocal for whatever reason. That we forget the 95% of the community. They're kind of silent, they're quiet, they're hard to reach, whatever it is. So my number one thing is around diversity of participation. And when we do the engagement planning and we do the analysis of who the community is, through the process, I'm continually looking at who the community is and ensuring they've got opportunities, multiple opportunities to participate. And at the end, as a practitioner, if we haven't got to every one of those groups, from the very busy MP through to the person sleeping rough, if we haven't got to any of them, there's a problem. So I continue to monitor that, and I evaluate the diversity of the participation at the end. As engagement practitioners, we're looking for an evidence base to give decision makers, not every project, but many of our projects. And so I want that evidence to be as full and complete and bring in all the perspectives of the diversity of the community. So that's mine. Clare?
Yeah, look, building on that, I really like the type of evaluation you can do where you start with a baseline and can see change over time as a result of your engagement. And, perhaps one of those is around the confidence that someone has that something is going to change because they've participated. So if you've asked them at the start, how confident are they that, that their involvement is going to have an impact, and then invite that same response at the end, and you can see a change, then you can really demonstrate that it was worth your time and worth their time participating as well.
Great. Thanks for all the excellent questions, everyone. And but I just wanted to pass back on to Amy briefly as a last point, who will be able to talk a bit further about the engagement scorecard. Go for it, Amy.
Thanks, team. I'm just going to share my screen. All right. So Capire is, well, I think I'm responsible for this at Capire. We are preparing an engagement scorecard, and so the engagement scorecard is not about replacing evaluation frameworks and doing your own evaluation on projects, but what we want to be able to do is benchmark our project sectors and clients, and we want to do that with just kind of less than a handful of indicators across projects. So that is the great challenge, and we will be sharing this with the industry, of course. But we're going to be working on it over the next 2 months, and we will have a concept to sort of test with the industry later in the year. So if any of you are interested in participating in those conversations, we'll have some forums. Probably they'll be online. Please get in touch or look out in Capire News. But when I talk about less than a handful, I'm talking about 2 or 3 things that we can benchmark across projects. Of course, people and organisations and projects come from different sectors, different types of projects. But I'm just going to put a question out there. If you could measure 2 things in your engagement processes, what would they be? Can't measure everything, but if you could measure a couple of things, what would they be? So I'll leave that out there. But if you are interested in participating in a conversation about the engagement scorecard, get in touch. Capire News. It will be publicly available as well once it's completed. So thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone. That concludes our Learning Lab. As always will be.